All right, we are live now. Um, Thank you, everyone, for your patience getting started this evening, and welcome to Square Books in Oxford, Mississippi. We are so pleased to welcome you to this virtual event featuring the publication of Megan Poland's debut collection of short stories, What Makes You Think You're Awake, from Blair Publishing. Yay!
Yeah.
We do, before we get started with this exciting discussion, we do have some housekeeping and announcements. Uh, Only the panelists have microphones and their videos are on. So if you have any questions, please type them into the Q&A and we will get to as many of those as we can. Squarebooks has a very active schedule of events, and you may see announcements for those by visiting our website, squarebooks.com. There you may also sign up for our weekly email newsletter, Dear Reader. We also post events and other book news on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, or our YouTube channel. You can see recordings of past events, and including this one if you want to watch it again. Our next event after tonight will be in our Crossroad Book Club series. This book club began following the murder of George Floyd, and the purpose was to encourage discussion of race and racism in America. Our next author will be Theodore R. Johnson, and he'll be discussing his book, When the Stars Begin to Fall, with former Governor and Secretary of the Navy Ray Mabus. That will be on Wednesday, July 7th at 6 p.m. This event is free to attend, but registration is required. On July 12th, we will be celebrating in real life the release of Ace Atkins' newest Quinn Colson novel, The Heathens. The Ocmulgee Arts Council has kindly allowed us to host a Tibaha County picnic at the Old Armory Pavilion. Tate Moore will provide music, the Hospitality Bros, cocktails, and Taylor Catfish will offer refreshments. Jack Pendarvis will be in conversation with Ace, as is their tradition. And so all you have to do is show up by 6 p.m. to set up your chair. On July 15th, we will host Elizabeth Gonzalez James discussing her debut novel, Mona at Sea, with Galadriel Allman. So you can see details of these events and more by visiting our website, squarebooks.com, and you can find it on social media and everything else. So now, on to the fun part, tonight's event. We are so delighted to welcome Megan Poland back to Oxford virtually for her debut collection of short stories. What Makes You Think You're Awake? It won the Balkan Award at Blair Press. When she is not working, Megan is assistant teaching professor at Drexel University in Philadelphia. That's work. I actually meant to say when she's not writing, which is also work too, but uh, she received her PhD in English from the University of Nevada, where she was a Black Mountain Institute Fellow. She has an MFA in fiction from the University of Mississippi. Go team! And a BFA from the University of Southern California. She has been published in the Pleiades, Mississippi Review, Lit Hub, and many others. She was an editor for Witness Magazine and the Yellow Bushes Review. She's received a grant from the Elizabeth George Foundation to support her writing. To talk with Megan is our old friend, Tom Franklin, author of Crooked Letter, Smunk, Hell at the Breach, Poachers, and with his wife, Beth Ann Finley, The Tilted World. He has received a Guggenheim Fellowship, the Golden Dagger Award, the Edgar Award, the Willie Morris Prize for Southern Fiction, and he teaches in the MFA program at Ole Miss, which is where y'all first became acquainted. So welcome, Tommy. Welcome, Megan. Thank y'all so much for doing this.
Thank you
Thank
so
you,
much for
Lynn.
having me. Thank you.
It's such an honor.
You know, Megan, I remember my very first reading at Square Books. There were about 7 people there, and I now realize that one of them was Slade and one was Cody. They were all employees who were there. You've got a much better audience here, albeit virtually, for your debut Square Books reading. And I'm so pleased for you and proud of you. And I love this book. So thank you for being here at Square Books.
Thank you so much. Seriously, this is such an honor, and has been like, it's such an honor to have you host this event with me. Thank you. And also, I've been dreaming of reading at Square Books, since my Oxford days. So, I wish I could be there in person, but this is great. This is great. I think the internet.
Well, you'll be here soon. And I see a lot of our old friends in the audience. I see Jimmy Gajolius. I see Meredith Harper. There's Michael Shea. You know him. So you've got a great crowd here. It's, yeah. So I'm real happy about that. One thing I remember is a workshop we had together. I don't know if you remember this, but we had it in that Mediterranean restaurant, and it might be like Bouret or some place. Story, like the love of some dead girl, right? And we talked about both asexuality and voyeurism. And I thought, that's everything I want from fiction. It was a great story. It's a great story. I love it in this book, and I love that workshop and talking about it, but in the restaurant/bar. So anyway, that's just a great memory that I have of you.
Oh, thank you. I will say, I think the internet slowed down for just a moment, so I'm gonna kick Michael Shea, my husband, off so that I can not have it lag. I just heard him holler up. He's signing off. So, but yeah, I think I caught all of that. But yeah, Petra. I think I also saw Michelle Bright saying, like, yeah, I think
Petra, thank you.
Yes. That's one of 2 stories that I wrote during the MFA that made it into the collection, and I totally remember that workshop. I'm so glad that I got to workshop with you, because I remember that was my 3rd year, and it was exciting to have that opportunity.
You had some amazing teachers. You had Jasmine Ward, didn't you?
Yeah, I think that was my first year. I had John Brandon my first semester, and then
wow,
I think that was my first year. I think it was like 2nd semester was Jasmine Ward, which was just was amazing, right? Amazing to have had that opportunity. And they were both so kind and generous. And I was very nervous to have my first grad school workshopping experience. So they were the perfect people to help me acclimate to that.
I think you also had Chris Offutt, didn't you?
I took Chris Offutt's forms class. Yeah, so which was also amazing. And he actually was the person who assigned and therefore introduced me to Claire Vay Watkins.
Oh yeah,
we're being like so blown away by that collection. Really, I think that really, inspired me in terms of thinking what collections can do. But yeah, so I got to have that class with Chris Offutt. I stayed with Nick Brown when I was there. Josh Weil as well.
Wow, you were here at a good time. Another Ann Fisher Worth says to tell you hello. She is at this moment flying to Oregon. It wasn't hot enough in Mississippi for her, so she's gone to Oregon for the real heat now.
Oh wow!
But we're all still fans of yours. So you're gonna do a short reading for us, then we'll talk for a while, then one more short reading. Is that correct?
Yes, that sounds great.
And then questions from your wonderful audience.
All right, so I'm going to start. Actually, there are 2 stories that made it into this collection from my MFA years, of course, revised. But there's a 3rd story where the very first version of it, or something that I tried to write that dealt with caviar farmers, was something that I wrote when I was in the MFA, but it just it never quite worked. And I just had to kind of put it in a drawer, and then in 2017 and 2018, I just rewrote it from scratch. And so it's a totally different story now, but like some of the research I did, some of the like imagery that inspired me was from my MFA time. So this is a story called Milking, and it's about partially about caviar farmers, sustainable caviar farmers. This is, so the main characters, Diane and Kyle, are a couple who are struggling with fertility. And this is like a little bit into the story. The main character, Diane, has met an artist at an exhibit who has a history of being a surrogate. And so she's starting to get ideas about this woman and getting a little fixated on her and on the possibility of even her being a surrogate. So I'm going to start at that point. A week after the exhibit, when Cindy had emailed her, Diane insisted that she come over for dinner to compensate her for her trouble. That's really not necessary, Cindy had responded, forcing Diane to reveal something adjacent to complete honesty. That was when she called her and told her that she wanted to, quote, pick her brain about surrogacy. Now in the foyer, there was a piece of driftwood with a nest pinned by a nail, like a wreath to the branch. Now in the dining room, there was a vegan eating carrots as Diane struggled to swallow her achingly rare meat. She mulled over how to make surrogacy sound like a light topic, a casual exchange of chit-chat, when such a topic could never be anything other than the sequel to a tragedy. What is that picture with the dark circular things, Cindy said, pointing with her fork to the wall behind Kyle, where Diane had hung a gallery of photos in gold frames. It's a picture of our fish tanks from above, Kyle said. Kyle had taken the photo from the roof. Through a skylight they later removed in order to better regulate the temperature and lighting schedule of the tanks below. They live in those circles, Cindy said. Kyle shot Diane a look as if to say, I got this. She saw it through Cindy's eyes. He reclined in his cane-backed chair, indulging in that masculine tradition of luxuriating in physical space to broadcast complete assuredness, and said, our operation actually saves the lives of fish, might even save an entire species from extinction. So if you're worried about the ethics, we're on the same page. That's why we do what we do. Don't you shank them in the ovaries, Cindy said, adding in a subdued tone. I saw a video once. Diane cringed. They weren't set for life. The business could still fail. She might have to start over yet again, building up from nothing. But they were part of a world where fine dining was an extension of their expertise. And she liked to believe there was artfulness, an elevation of experience that they offered. But what must they look like? Her little black dress and statement necklace, her husband's crisp blazer. Kyle never dressed up except for dinners with prospective clients and investors. He dressed up tonight because she asked him to. We need her, she had said to him, his face in her hands, his stubble grazing the calluses she'd developed from years of caring for the fish, years of chemicals, the many harvests. That's not really accurate, Kyle said. We can show you the procedure. The hatchery is just down the street, down our driveway, really. The procedure. That morning, Kyle had cradled the flailing sturgeon against his chest as he carried her from the tank to the milking trough. The metal cradle designed to hug the supine body as they took all the eggs from her swollen belly. He had held the head in place as one of the hatchery employees prepared the collection bin. Even after all these years, Diane couldn't shake the impression that the sturgeon, at this angle, had human faces with upturned noses and surprised mouths, which is why she spoke to them sometimes when it was time to slide the catheter into the oviduct inlet, a term that made her think of the ocean, and therefore of all the eggs roiling around in this internal sea of a fish belly. During the procedure, she would slide her hand down the pearl white underside over and over, guiding the inky beads out of the sturgeon and gushing rivulets. Most nights, Diane would dream of them, a drifting slideshow of the sturgeon in their tanks, prehistoric, older than dinosaurs, with bony scutes scarring their sides. If you sliced open the ridges, rings would mark the age of their bones, just like the trunk of a tree. Recently, perhaps spurred by this fact, she would dream of the fish in cross sections, their heads detached with mouths still gulping as eggs fell thick from their partitioned bellies, spilling to the concrete floor, into the Clorox muck, and down the drain. Unconscious, she would flail, displacing Kyle to the couch. Often, she woke to her arms stretched over her head, like she was reaching for the window. It was Diane's idea to convert the hatchery from catfish to sturgeon, to farm sustainable caviar. She researched the method, the non-surgical use of the metal tube paired with a deep massage. In little over a year, the fish would heal and grow more eggs for the next harvest. The reproductive irony was impossible to miss. There was a horrific symmetry to the proceedings, the stealing of their eggs for a nice family business, something to pass on to generations that might never come. Used to be, everyone just killed the fish. They killed so many that they nearly eradicated sturgeon from the Black Sea. You would cut out the ovary and slide it back and forth over mesh to separate the eggs. What was left looked like broken pieces of placenta. The entire life of the fish reduced to a tin of caviar, and the silken pink membranes washed down the drain.
Thank you. I love that story. Here's a great statement. It's one of the more normal stories in the book. Didn't you say?
What is one of, sorry, you cut out a little bit, but I heard that it's one of the more.
Are you there?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. I heard you say that's one of the more normal stories of the
Yeah.
book. I mean, there is, so I think like I like to flirt with the line of things being a bit surreal, and sometimes things are just on the realism side of it, and sometimes they cross over just a little bit. And that story, toward the end, in my mind, she is imagining, this possibility of a curse and thinking about the fish in that way. So it leaves it to the possibility of like, is this realism? How much is she projecting something, unnatural onto the world, and how much is she actually, influenced by these forces?
But you also take such wonderful care with the real world that when it does slip into the fantastic, it still feels so grounded. And and even the more fantastical stories are grounded in that same kind of reality. So, all right, you came from a film background. How did that? How does that background help your fiction? How do you reconcile the two? Do you still write? Do you still write screenplays, teleplays?
Sometimes I have an itch. Like, that's an interesting question. I sometimes I do have an itch to think like, oh, this would be a great screenplay. I should work on that. But I'm just honestly so busy that like, it's like, if I have time to write, it's going to be the fiction, at least at this time in my life. Yeah, I went to USC Film School and focused on screenwriting. And tried to do the screenwriting thing for a little bit after that. I had like, a very small script option, had my script optioned and did a rewrite for hire on it, and nothing got made, which is very common. But that really trained me to think about, what are you seeing? What are you hearing? And that was all, it's a blueprint for somebody else to flesh out. And so I think that was helpful in terms of thinking about how you show and how you do have to have momentum of conflict that is happening in a sensory way. But when I first came to Mississippi, I will say, like, I really struggled because like there were things I was reading that I really loved that were really voice driven or deeply psychological, and layers and layers of interiority and time shifts, and even though I loved reading these things, I hadn't internalized how to pull that off. And so what I was instinctively writing on first drafts were what could be called like objective third person, where it was basically like Hills Like White Elephants style, like this could be a screenplay. It's just what you are seeing and hearing, and I would have to go in and sort of carve out the interiority later, which often wouldn't flow as well as I would like. So I knew that, and so I was trying to read to try and push myself in this other direction. Now I would say, I hope that I have shifted, but now the revision process is very different. I indulge in a lot of that interiority and find myself having to get back to the present action and not lose the momentum of the scene.
I wonder, if you were to go back to screenwriting, what you would take from fiction writing.
That's a great question. Yeah, since I haven't tried that yet, I have to think about that on the spot. I think that it's something that I should have learned sooner, but I was also really young when I was trying to be a screenwriter. And so I think like age, at least for me, helps with this. Like I know there are, sometimes I'm writing from undergraduates or students where I'm just like, wow, they're just, amazingly advanced for their age. But for myself, I think I benefited from having more years. I think that from reading so much more fiction and thinking maybe in more depth about the layers of the psychology of these characters, it's helped me more with thinking about subtext. So, thinking about how I can show that subtext in screenwriting would be something that I would be thinking more about now, I think, if I return to a screenplay. But that's just my own journey because of where I was at when I was studying screenwriting. I don't think that everybody needs to probably have that journey to get to that place.
Somebody who's like to ask writers is how how a story comes to be. This question can go one of two ways. You can talk about, and you did a little bit already, about how your previous reading came to be, or talk about how the next reading came to be, and then read, what's a story. Is it an image? Is it an intellectual idea for you?
So it cut out for just a moment there. I don't know if this is on my end, but and if it is on my end, I'm so sorry. But what I took from that was, next time I do my reading, describe how that story came to be. Yes?
Yes, that would work.
Or was that not it?
I'm just interested, I guess, in your general process, where a story comes from, and I thought you could use either the prior reading or the next reading as an example of use that story as an example of how it came to you.
Okay. Yeah, and I mean, so with different stories, it's different ways that I find my way into the story. Like with Overnight's Welcome, I was like falling asleep, and I just had this image flash in my head of like a slick sort of postcard / invitation that was of a blue door. And imagine somebody had scrawled Overnight's Welcome on it. And that was just like what popped in my head. And at that point I was, then I don't know, I was just like, I was obsessed with that image and trying to write a story around it. But with, so sometimes it's an image, sometimes it's often a mood. And then I have like a notes file where I collect things that I've observed, overheard dialogue, news stories, things like that. And when I'm trying to start a new story, if I don't have a strong impulse right away, I will read through that notes file and I will try to find ingredients that I think would help me go toward that mood. But with Modern Relics, which would be the story that I would read, that if we have time, that I would read next, that had like a very obvious inception, which was, it's a story about, it's set in the future, but it's a couple who are on their honeymoon at like a luxury resort that is largely automated, dealing with like, future of AI and everything. But they're also like, they're on points and they don't have enough money to like take advantage of any of the luxury, nickel and diming that the resort has. So they're kind of like trapped in this luxury resort. And so, obviously I haven't been to the future and I haven't experienced the like AI luxury resort, but, Michael, my husband, and I actually did have this experience where we were gifted points to stay at this really nice hotel for one day. And when we got there, we were like, we are trapped. Like, we can't afford anything here. And we were really grateful to be there. But like, we were like, kind of rushing around trying to avoid people because everywhere you turn, there were people trying to like upsell you on buying things or doing a tour or what have you. And I thought, this situation magnified with like, fictional characters would be a great setting. And so I just kind of like took that and ran with it. Are you there?
Yeah, I think any fluctuations come from my end. There probably is our kids on Xboxes and all kind of things. So I'm sorry. Probably it's from my end.
Oh, no worries. It could be my end. But were you able to hear what I said?
I was, yes.
Okay.
So I said so the story you just talked about is the one you're going to read from now.
Yeah.
And then we'll take some audience questions. I see there are some in the chat.
And then just like thought, sorry, I thought I heard like a buzz and I was trying to make sure that I did not have my phone on, which apparently I do. So sorry about that. I got a new phone and because my other phone died, and I apparently don't know how to operate Do Not Disturb properly on it yet. I keep thinking that I have it turned off and I do not. Okay, so this is from that story, Modern Relics, that I was just talking about. And so this is, they've already checked into the resort. They've already realized the problem, which is that, you know, they can't afford anything and they're being like heavily surveilled with, you know, again, this being like a high-tech future resort. And the, you know, this is supposed to be their honeymoon. The main characters are Marion and Gerald. And Marion has also, like, her father passed away and she's like never quite gotten over it. And so, you know, that's another element to sort of her mood here. So this is when they wake up after nodding off in the hotel after check-in. They nodded off when they awoke. Rhonda, and Rhonda is their AI for their hotel room. They nodded off when they awoke. Rhonda told them the time was 1700. Marion felt a heaviness in her chest. Nearly 15% of their honeymoon was already over. She had thought this would feel like an escape, like they'd been freed from their usual worries and obligations, and this new chapter of their life was finally beginning, but everything felt the same. She caught Gerald staring at her, his face still creased by the stitching of the pillowcase. "What's wrong?" he asked. "We've already lost a day. We still have the entire evening," he said. "But we didn't see the water when it was bright and turquoise." Suddenly, she could smell cheap coconut-scented sunscreen, and she recalled her mother rubbing it into her shoulders. At least, she thought it was her mother. It had been so long ago. Whoever was rubbing her shoulders, she remembered the wholesome absence of worry, and her father, soon after, carrying her into the surf, always keeping her head above the water. She could spend her whole life chasing that feeling. "We'll see the water tomorrow," Gerald said, "and the next day, and the next." "I just don't want to waste any more time," she said. She wanted Gerald to pull her to him, like he sometimes did when he was feeling tolerant of her melancholy, and to run his fingers across her scalp. Instead, she could see that this was not one of his sympathetic moods. He was tired of her spells of grieving, and she knew he deserved to be. She was her father's daughter, with his somber view on the transience of the world. Before he died 3 years ago, he talked incessantly about the likelihood that he would succumb to a complication from his diabetes. He had turned his will and his plans for his burial into a casual topic of Sunday afternoon phone calls. He had 2 dogs, and he would carry around a wrist bracelet that had Marion's number on it with the engraved phrase, "Emergency caretaker for dogs." Although he'd been right to worry about his untimely demise, a fulfillment of paranoia that she knew Gerald deeply resented, largely because it confirmed all of Marion's inherited neuroses, the diabetes was not what did him in. It was a coyote attack. Not that the coyotes had harmed her dad personally, but they went after his dogs as best as anyone could tell, based on the carcass of Doodles and the wounds on Ginger, who'd miraculously escaped and now lived with them, lumpily scarred and pumped full of Prozac, in their tiny apartment in Philly. Marion's father was found in a ravine near a creek bed, his neck broken, not far from what remained of the golden doodle. And when the emergency responders arrived, tipped off by a startled hiker, they saw the bracelet and called Marion. Thinking that she was just a dog sitter per the engraved label, they broke the news in a brash manner, asking without preamble if she could watch the dogs for their deceased owner. Still, they found her immediately. Her father had been right. Now Marion was wincing at the ceiling fan like it was going to break off and hack her into pieces. She could feel Gerald assessing the situation, assessing her. Suddenly he leapt from the bed and loomed over her with fingers energetically splayed into jazz hands. "You're succumbing to mawkishness," Gerald said. "Let's go to the pool bar." "It's too expensive," she said, snuggling into her pillow. He yanked it away. "Hey, just one," he promised. With a bit more coaxing, Marion pulled her hair into a bun and they left the room. They took a few wrong turns, but there were always employees eager to intercept and give directions. At one point, they passed a robotic crab carrying a tray of dirty dishes to an automated sanitation cart. Its amatophores swiveled to assess the couple's trajectory, tracking them with green, unwavering eyes. They passed through a wide hallway that had been staged as an art gallery. Marion was no artist, but she found herself embarrassed for the cluster of portraits that used sequins and glitter to depict evening gowns on women with unnaturally configured teeth. Then she gasped at the sight of a brilliantly rendered bird, its wings a jewel bright rainbow. Its eyes looked sad and stricken to her, full, lucid circles peering over a severe black beak. She stepped closer, trying to detect the brush strokes. A curator in a shiny black blazer descended on them. It's a Martin Davino original, the curator bragged, and that is an extremely rare scarlet macaw, a clone he had made before they steepened penalties for the ban. They'll probably go extinct again soon, but we have replicas in the nature preserve. They talk and everything, just like the originals. Sounds expensive, Gerald said. How awful, Marion said. She hated to think of the bird's resurrection, only to exist as a model for a two-dimensional image that would be sold to a rich tourist at a resort, how it would die, the last of its kind, a second time. There's nothing we can do about it, Gerald said, linking his fingers with hers, and squeezed her hand. They crossed a skywalk. A lazy river wound its way beneath them, carrying along a sunburnt man sipping Corona in his inner tube. On the other side, in the west wing of the building, they found the beachfront portion of the property. The evening sun glittered off the sea, golden flecks masking the blue water. They found a table at the beach bar, a patio with a crisp white awning. Marion pulled the hem of her skirt down so she could sit on the metal chair without burning her thighs. She watched as Gerald fetched 2 beers and gestured enthusiastically with the bartender. Both alternated pointing and pantomiming a series of turns. Gerald returned, heroic. So Joe, the bartender, told me his favorite restaurant is just a mile or 2 up the road, an Indian Caribbean place, totally affordable, and, his smile grew, get this, it's next to a mini mart. We can pick up some things for breakfast to keep in the room. Great, Marion said, already picturing the limitations of their mini fridge and compiling a list of reasonable food products, string cheese, apples, instant oatmeal prepackaged in cups, perhaps some kind of beef jerky, although she still struggled with the synthetic texture of most packaged meat. A few farms still raised cows the old-fashioned way for elite restaurants. The resort probably had grass-fed, pasture-raised beef on their priceless menus, but it was rare to see a field of cattle along the road. Maybe someday they'd have fields of replicas, fake munching on fake grass, a way to feel nostalgia spawned by Western films and old dairy ads. We no longer need the cows, she thought, but we need their ghosts. Then she thought of the botanical preserve and its mechanical beasts. She didn't want to see the fake macaws. That would mean validating the preserve's decision to buy the cheap spectacle, the simulacrum of the inefficiently organic creature. Her stomach lurched, and she turned to find Gerald staring at her. What are you thinking about? He asked. Food, she said. He smiled, relieved, like he could solve that problem.
Thank you. It's wonderful. All right, so do we have questions from our delightful audience? I know that Michelle Bright, our friend, asked about the research for the caviar story.
For the caviar story. Yeah, so, when I first started researching it, it was, my Oxford days. To be perfectly honest, I don't know how I landed on this idea of caviar farmers. It's been too long. I'm sure there was something that, because it's not like I was in the habit of eating caviar. I don't know where that stuck, but somehow I read something about caviar farmers and I thought that was interesting. And then I went down a rabbit hole. So I remember at the time, reading articles, watching a lot of YouTube videos where they're like sustainable caviar farmers, like showing their whole milking process. And there's like different strategies, different methods, and people are still debating which is, the most appropriate. But it was still like at the time, I feel like it seemed like very cutting edge. And now it seems like it's being advertised a lot and is more common, more accepted. But yeah, I just like read a lot of articles, tried to find, photographs and videos of the process and looking at like hatcheries and things like that to try and get a sense of what the sensory details would be. And that's really how I did the research for that. It did make me want to have caviar. I had like a fictional idea of what caviar would be.
So you've never had it?
I had probably what was not sturgeon caviar. And maybe if I had caviar before that, I had like, like where it's like, they give you like the tiniest little sprinkle on top of like an egg or something like that, where it's like, it's just like a sort of a decoration on another dish. So I did seek out, like, I'm not saying it's the best caviar, but I did seek out technically like sturgeon caviar, sustainable, um, you know, because of writing that story. I got kind of obsessed, and I was like, what does it taste like? And so I had to, it was research. I had to
You,
do
you would
it.
have, of course you had to. I'd be mad if you didn't. So Jimmy Cajolia says, I love the book. So many of the stories have an eerie, unnerving quality. Do you ever frighten yourself with your own stories? That's
Oh,
from Jimmy.
thank you so much for being here, Jimmy, and thank you for reading. Yeah, like now I'm like, I think sometimes I think I'm a bit of like a method writer, in the sense that like I inhabit the psychology of my characters, and I get like, if they're moody, I'm moody, and if they're creeped out, I'm creeped out, and so in that sense, like, I think there's a story that deals with stalking, and that writing that kind of put me in a space where I felt very unsettled. So I guess that's what I would say is, like, writing these stories can be very unsettling for me. Yeah.
That's interesting. I see other questions. Um, Gil Hercules says, why short stories?
Yeah. I'm trying to write a novel now. so that's I think of myself as a short story writer, though. I do now, and I don't know if I thought that when I was entering into the MFA. Like, I didn't know what I was. I just knew that, like, I was trying to write fiction, and I just kind of fell in love with the short story while I was there. I think there's just something about like that crystallized moment in somebody's life that's really alluring to me. If you, I think I'm drawn to that form for that reason. There's like, the compression and again, like trying to have that like focused pivotal moment, and then just kind of like living that moment with that character and then moving on. There's something very poignant about that. But yeah, I mean, I obviously love novels too, and perhaps I will also be a novel writer. We shall see.
Well, you are the old-fashioned MFA person who writes who wrote a short story collection for your thesis. Now they're all writing novels. It's pretty interesting. I've really watched a vast change in what's been turned in over the years. We have other good questions. Let's see. I don't mean to see. We have Meredith. Our friend Meredith Harper says, what was your process for determining the thematic through lines, through lines for the collection, title of collection, order of stories, etc.? Oh, that's a good question. That's a writer's question.
That is such a great question. Hi, Meredith. It's so wonderful to have people from the MFA here. That means so much. I wish we were all there in the same space. Yeah. So, when I was writing it, I had to start by just like writing the stories I was drawn to, and wasn't sure if they were coming to be perfectly honest, wasn't sure if they were going to come together as a collection at first, when I was writing my first stories. And there are a lot of stories that I've written that like are not in the collection, and that I just kind of had to put aside. So basically I just was writing stories and gravitating towards certain themes. And once I was like really gravitating towards those themes for a while, I think then it just naturally built itself. And then with the last, like, once I had like several stories where I was like, these are exploring similar anxieties. And I would say like anxieties, like, body betrayal. I think like a lot of my stories deal with some sense of betrayal, sometimes from another person, sometimes from the body, and then dealing with a sense of alienation that can like affect perception afterwards. And so I think that's a recurring theme in a lot of these stories, some variation of that. So when I saw that theme kept recurring, then I started writing more consciously toward that. And when trying to order the stories, when I sent it out to, a handful of contests, and of course that's how I ended up getting published. And when I sent it out, it was a slightly different order originally, but the shed was always the first story. And I had a wonderful editor, Robin Mura at Blair, who, I got to talk with about the order of the stories, and she gave me some of her input too. But it felt to me like the shed really exemplified some of those anxieties that I was just talking about. that you know, so it kind of like sets up that expectation also that there might be things that are just a little bit off in the worlds of these other stories. So I thought that was like a good way to sort of, and I feel like the way the story ends was sort of like this unsettled, frozen moment, kind of created momentum that I hoped would lead into these other stories. But it's dealing with like a really menacing legacy of gender depression and dealing with you know, trauma and violation. And so, you know, I kind of wanted to, if I thought of that as sort of like a thesis or sort of a movement to start the book, I wanted the ending of the book to still deal with that in a different way. And so what makes you think you're awake? I did something really risky. It's second person, but it's a story where it's still dealing with that theme of like the legacy of violation and trauma and gender depression, but it does it in a less menacing way. It's dealing with something that's, I think, a lot dealing with you know, well-intentioned people who are trying to navigate, you know, the difficulty of knowing how to be mindful of what each other needs, right? So I guess what I would say is like, you know, that's what I try to bookend it that way, to try and like have a similar thesis, but maybe sort of almost like a counterpoint at the end. And for stories that try to create resolution for alienation, which is so pervasive throughout the book, I tried to keep those a little bit more towards the middle to create, again, like that sense of contrast, to offer this like, you know, other way that alienation could be explored by the characters. So yeah, that's how I tried to think about the order of that and how they were connected.
Well, can everyone can you still hear me, Megan?
Yes.
Okay. So I did something on my computer and everything's gone away. But the question you just answered encompassed Sarah Huddleston's question about the order of the stories. But the last question that I see, and then we'll say goodbye, is from Jean Poland, who might or might not be related. I'm not sure. And Jean Poland asks, do you use a soundtrack to set the mood when you write? That's an interesting question.
Now I'm like, I know other Polands, but I'm like, do I know? Sorry, but so it's a mystery. But yeah, do I use a soundtrack when I write? Sometimes I do. Sometimes, especially when I'm trying to imagine what I'm going to write, I use a soundtrack. When I'm actually doing the writing itself, sometimes I need to turn the music off to hear the sentences. So, you know, it's like I alternate between those two. But yeah, like I was thinking about, you know, I actually made like a playlist for the short story collection, which you can find online. But I think like when I was trying to write things that were really unsettling, I played like some Aphex Twin, some like ambient Aphex Twin music that just felt like very haunting and creeped myself out, you know, to put myself in that headspace. You know, when I was like, another thing that I'll turn to is like, you know, Arvo Part, like listening to like Tabula Rasa and just like having that very moody, I don't know if you're familiar, but like, you know, it's just like very moody, you know, orchestral music. So yeah, I tend to turn to like these sort of, I think, darker ambient or, you know, orchestral numbers to try and get in the right headspace.
Well, thank you so much, Megan. That I think maybe, Lynn, a good transition to
Yeah,
you.
just yeah, I wish I was sophisticated enough to play some music here, you know, we could go out on some music. Yeah, I will say there's one more question in chat, which I really think you addressed when you said that you were like a method actor. The question is, do you live with your characters while writing? So I think you said you were a method writer, and would that be, you know, you embody the characters and live with them? And
yeah, I mean, I when I think I'm really close to the story, it's like I'll be about to fall asleep and I'll suddenly imagine a conversation the character is having and be like, now I have to get out of bed and I have to write that down. So yeah, I do think they kind of take over a bit and demand my attention. And when I'm actually doing the writing itself, that's when I feel like it's like method writing. It's like in the sense that, like, you know, if my character is deeply upset about something, like I don't know what it is, but I feel like I have to get in the same mood, you know. So it's like I end up now, you know, if they're angry, then I feel angry as I'm writing it, you know. But yeah, so I guess they take over emotionally when I'm literally writing, and then when I'm able to walk away from a computer, I'm not still in that emotional space, but they do their dialogue interrupts my life.
Well, I guess that's why your characters feel so, you know, real and genuine and actual humans. So, since they since they possess you like poltergeists. Oh, that's great. Well, thank you so much. Congratulations on this publication, and we hope that you'll be able to come back in real life to Square Books when your novel comes out. I think that's what you're working on, a novel now, and or whenever you'd like. Earlier, you had a little Zoom picture of City Grocery balcony. Have you posted that? You should do that.
I
So
should.
at this point, that's where we would be heading.
Yeah. I would be buying you drinks. And everybody in the audience, I'd be buying drinks for. Everybody in the audience.
Everybody. Yes.
I'm just going to teleport myself there.
Oh.
Tommy, this is recorded, so just, you know, when Megan Poland comes to the store, we may have to pull out this recording. Just a
I
reminder.
love those people, yeah.
What makes you think you're awake? Megan Poland, great book. Thank you so much for joining us. And Tommy Franklin, thank you for hosting this event. And
Thanks for letting me.
thank you, everybody out there, for being with us and all of your support during all these many long months. Thanks for keeping Square Books and books alive and supporting all these wonderful writers that we have visit us. So thank you all.
Thank you everybody who joined, and thank you so much, Tommy, and thank you to Square Books for having this event. I'm so happy.
Thanks, Glenn. Thank you, Megan. Congratulations.
Thank you. Should I go ahead and leave? Yeah.